Right, let's go straight across to the shots coming in from Italy, where Prime Minister Modi has in fact just held a meeting. There, the visuals on your screen there right now with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. These are the meetings, of course, which are taking place on the sidelines of the summit. I believe this was not one of the scheduled meetings which were meant to take place today, but it was highly expected that this meeting will take place. Volodymyr Zelensky there at the G7 summit, and this meeting taking place with Prime Minister Modi there. The visuals on your screens right now. Let me go across to my colleague Vishnu Shom for more on this. Vishnu, this is highly significant. India, of course, has in fact right from the beginning played a very significant role in terms of talking to both the Ukrainian side as well as the Russian side amid the war, the ongoing conflict in that region. And this meeting taking place in Italy at the moment with Volodymyr Zelensky will be in addition to the kind of support or, dialogues that India always has had with both sides in amid all this conflict.
You know, it is very significant that the Prime Minister has met Volodymyr Zelensky over here. It wasn't clear whether or not this meeting would take place. It is significant because the primary agenda as far as G7 is concerned is Ukraine. And I think the fact that he is meeting the Ukrainian president sends a pretty strong signal to Moscow as well. Moscow isn't, Russia isn't here as a participant at the G7, but it does send a message to Russia that India isn't with any one power bloc. India has close relations with everybody, and so there is an excellent relationship with Russia. There's certainly an excellent relationship with Ukraine as well. India wants the war in Ukraine to end, the humanitarian tragedy over there, the loss of territory, the immense suffering at so many levels, the economic consequences, industrial consequences which have devastated Ukraine and certainly parts of Russia as well, is something that just needs to come to an end. It's been more than 2.5 years. I should tell you that this meeting with Zelensky is not something that we knew about earlier on. There were a couple of slots which were kept open by the External Affairs Ministry officials, obviously working the channels, and this is a meeting which was enabled, so it did take place. There have also been other meetings with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and also with the French President Emmanuel Macron.
Vishnu, Ukraine as well as the conflict in Israel, rather the Israel-Hamas war, those two were supposed to dominate the agenda of G7 as per reports. So in terms of the what is going to be discussed in the G7 among all the other leaders as well, what are we expecting in terms of how the leaders are actually, the Western leaders rather, are positioning themselves, and what additional help are they providing to Ukraine in this conflict with Russia?
Well, what we can actually tell you at this juncture is that there is a very important effort which is taking place when it comes to the transfer of approximately $50 billion worth of funds from seized Russian assets to Ukraine. So not only is Ukraine being propped up through military assistance, the US announced a record military aid package some time back. That's already flowing in. But this is an economic package which is meant to bolster the country. They're entirely reliant on external funding to run Ukraine at this stage. There are some legal issues which are, in a potential problem in ensuring that 50 billion or so does ultimately make its way into Ukraine, but that is being resolved. I expect that to be one of the major takeaways of the G7 summit. As far as Israel is concerned, remember, Israel isn't over here. However, Israel's closest allies are, and therefore there would possibly be in that G7 statement, when it does come out at some stage tomorrow or possibly day after, a categorical mention of the need for the humanitarian suffering and tragedy in Gaza to come to an end, while reinforcing that terrorism is unacceptable entirely, and therefore also in a sense balancing Israel's concerns over terrorism with the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza. Also, there has been one successful hostage for prisoners swap. Would there be another one? Would there be a push at the level of the G7 to ensure that that takes place? That's something we'll have to wait and see.
Right, Vishnu, coming back to the meeting between Zelensky and Prime Minister Modi, what could be Ukraine's ask from India, considering the role that we've seen, as we mentioned, as we were discussing, that India has played in terms of talking to both sides, given the history of, the kind of expectations that Ukraine has had from India? What could be Zelensky's demand from Prime Minister Modi now?
Well, I've engaged with the Ukrainian foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, on a couple of occasions. We've done 3 interviews on NDTV. I've traveled extensively throughout the war zone in Ukraine. I've come to understand a little bit about what Ukraine's expectations are of India. Number one, there is a hope that Prime Minister Modi, using his channels, can effectively reach out to the Russian President Vladimir Putin to try and ensure that a path that can somehow be found to actually bringing this war to an end. There is a real hope, and everybody in Ukraine, certainly the leadership of Ukraine, understands that close link that India has. So could India play the role of an interlocutor? Thus far, India has not been very, very interested in pursuing that, at least not aggressively. What happens in the behind the scenes sort of level is something we are not very interested about. However, there was a strong signal from India when a couple of years back the Prime Minister did say that this is not an era for war. He said this to President Putin. There is a hope that that message can actually go out, that look, please try and end this. The fact that you've got the Ukrainians so willing to engage India comes at a time when India continues to import massive quantities of Russian oil. And that's something that they're upset about. They don't like that. But we have got our own self-interest in mind. It's nation first. These are competitively priced oil resources which India wants at this juncture. So we made it an absolute priority. Of course, we want the war in Ukraine to end. Of course, we want the misery to end. But at the same time, when it comes to the import of oil, it's something that India needs to do. And also, there are tremendous double standards as far as Europe is concerned. When it comes to the import of oil and natural gas from Russia, it's not exactly as if the pipelines were instantly switched off to the West.
Right, Vishnu, the visuals on our screen right now, we have actually put out all the key meetings that Prime Ministers had so far with Emmanuel Macron, with Rishi Sunak, and also now with Volodymyr Zelensky. This is the first big international trip of Prime Minister Modi since taking over as the Prime Minister for the 3rd time. In a way, India once again projecting itself as the voice of the global South. So very key, significant trip by the Prime Minister in Italy this time, attending the G7, India attending for the 11th time. Talk us through some of the meetings and the bilaterals that the Prime Ministers, some of them already done, and more ahead, which the Prime Minister is going to have, the meetings that he will have today.
So the Prime Minister has already met the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He's met the French President Emmanuel Macron. He's met the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He will be meeting Prime Minister Kishida of Japan. He will be meeting Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor. And at this juncture, it's unclear whether he'll be meeting the US President Joe Biden, though given the extremely close relations between India and the United States, it's entirely likely that that would take place as well. So these are the important meetings which are scheduled over here. And I should mention, not least of all, the important relationship between India and Italy. Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, Italy being the host country this time around. India and Italy have an important strategic partnership. It's a partnership based on a relationship at so many levels. The economic equation has been growing significantly. There are 2 lakh people of Indian origin in this country. $400 million is the investment made by Indian companies into Italy. There is a sense that high-tech transfers, certainly in the field of defense, is something that both countries are looking at, in addition to military exercises possibly as well. So Italy, very, very important. At the end of the day today, before he flies back to India, there will be an informal dinner hosted by the Italian Prime Minister for Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Right, and amid all this, there's of course reports that Prime Minister Modi might also be having a meeting with Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. Is there any confirmation on that so far? We can see the bilaterals have already started, but any information yet on this meeting likely to take place between PM Modi and Justin Trudeau?
Give me half a second as I try and reach out to my phone to see if there is any update on that, because that is something which was actually being looked at very, very closely. No, I'm afraid there is no update on that right now. The last update that I do have is a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The real hope, in terms of a sense of anticipation, is whether Justin Trudeau and Prime Minister Narendra Modi would meet. India has huge concerns with Canada as far as Khalistani separatism and separatist activity on their soil. Whether or not that meeting takes place to bring that relationship, bringing it onto an even keel, that's something we'd have to wait and see. I don't have an update on whether that meeting has been scheduled at this juncture, but there is certainly a sense of anticipation. Tanima.
Right, Vishnu, let's go back to talking about Ukraine and how it is actually one of the main agenda points. The war in Ukraine is one of the main agenda points in G7. So, Ukraine being at the center stage in G7 in terms of Zelensky's demands, not just with vis-a-vis India, but also in terms of the West, in terms of the Western democracies, leaders who are representing that there at G7. What could be some of the demands that Ukraine has of those leaders as well?
Well, if you're talking about Ukraine, let's just talk about what the ground situation in Ukraine is. Number one, Ukraine faced a renewed Russian offensive, particularly in the north and the northeast of the country, near their second largest city, Kharkiv. That took place about a month plus back. The Ukrainians lost further territory over there. The Russians have been particularly persistent also in the Donbass region, which is further to, and Luhansk region, which is further to the east of the country. But those are areas where which they've occupied since 2014, and they continue to push westwards. The Ukrainians were fighting them, recapturing small amounts of territory as well. However, there was a renewed Russian push, and there was a real sense that Ukraine had started to lose the war a couple of months back. It was then that the United States pumped in or cleared a landmark defense deal worth billions and shipped, and those shipments have started coming in, artillery, ammunition, ballistic missile systems, surface-to-air missile systems, all sorts of air-launched munitions as well. They've pushed through training of Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter aircraft. And all in all, that situation around Kharkiv has certainly been stabilized. The Russians haven't gained anything. And there is clearly a sense that Ukraine, which was militarily almost on the verge of beginning the process of a military collapse, well, that has been staved off. And it seems quite clear that Ukraine will be able to continue, where they were, at least in terms of the fighting. The Ukrainians are absolutely clear. They don't want to stop fighting. They want to continue fighting for every inch of their territory. However, they need the assistance of the West to keep doing that. What Volodymyr Zelensky would be extremely worried about are the politics in Europe and America. Remember, the United States faces an election. If Donald Trump comes to power with his statements thus far on how he sees the war in Ukraine, there could be a reversal as far as America is concerned. That would be disastrous for Ukraine. The French president has actually announced snap polls, and he's just done that very, very recently. And therefore, that is something that might concern the Ukrainians as well. Why? Because with the rise of the east I beg your pardon, with the rise of some elements in the European Parliament, there is a sense that there could be trouble as far as Ukraine is concerned, because with new leaders and their policies, whether Ukraine would continue to enjoy that support or not remains to be seen. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak goes into elections also in a couple of months from now. And therefore, again, whoever comes to power in the United Kingdom, in case it's not Sunak, who's been a strong supporter of Zelensky, again, that's something that Zelensky would be worried about. It's quite possible that Russia is playing the waiting game as far as Ukraine is concerned, waiting to see and outlast all the political changes which may be in the offing in America and the United Kingdom, in France and elsewhere.